Last time on, the knife. As Lori entered the hospital the next morning, the receptionist handed her a note. It was from Doris Schneider, the head supervisor of the nurses. She asked Lori to come to her office first thing that morning. When she got to the 8th floor office of Miss Schneider, the supervisor told her that she was being transferred to the X-ray department and being removed from the children's floor. She told Lori that she had gotten some complaints about her, that she had been bothering some of the patients and spying on the nurses. Lori knew right away who must have made the complaint. It was Edith Wilton. She tried to explain to the supervisor what had happened, but Miss Schneider just told her not to take it personally. She knew Lori was a good worker, and that's why she was only being transferred rather than being sent home permanently. Lori felt defeated after leaving the supervisor's office. She decided she needed to talk to Nurse Wilton and set things right with her first. She would explain that she was only concerned about Toby and that she thought he was being mistreated by his mother. Later that evening, after her work for the day was done, Lori went to the 9th floor to look for Nurse Wilton. Lori spotted her as she came out of one of the patients' rooms down the hall. She began to follow her, but right as Lori was about to call out to her, she noticed something strange. Nurse Wilton was heading into the Franklin Fear Wing. Lori decided to wait for her at the nurses' station. As she waited, she eventually saw another person walk into the Fear Wing. This time, it was Rick Spencer. What could he be doing? Was it a planned meeting between him and Nurse Wilton? Lori decided to continue waiting. She didn't want to miss her chance to talk to Nurse Wilton when she came back out. Nearly half an hour went by as Lori continued to wait. She finally decided to enter the Fear Wing and see what was going on in there. The construction area was dark as Lori slowly made her way inside. Eventually, her feet bumped into something on the floor. She looked down to find Nurse Wilton's body lying on the floor with a surgical knife stuck in her throat. Lori turned back around and ran out of the Fear Wing and urgently called for Skye. She told her what she had found. Then, the two of them went to the nurse's station to tell Nurse Gerard. The nurse called for security and a doctor to investigate the situation. As Lori led them back into the Fear Wing, she almost ran into a gurney with a patient under sheets, being wheeled by an orderly wearing a surgical mask. Lori, Skye, Nurse Gerard, Dr. Sherman, and 2 security guards entered the Fear Wing. But when Lori took them to the spot where she found Nurse Wilton's body, she was shocked to see that there was no body lying on the ground. Skye asked her if it was some kind of joke, but Lori insisted that she knew what she saw, and she believed that Rick had to be the killer. Nurse Gerard and the security guards began questioning Lori as well. But to her surprise, Dr. Sherman quickly took the blame, saying that it was just a joke between him and another doctor. He apologized to everyone for getting them caught up in his pranks. As they all left the Fear Wing, Dr. Sherman asked the 2 girls not to say anything and keep the whole situation just between them. But Lori knew she wasn't mistaken. Someone had to have moved the body without anyone noticing. She was determined to figure out what was going on, and she knew now that she had to do this on her own. She decided that she would go back to Fear Street by herself and return to the Dean house to look for clues. Later that evening, Lori crept back into the office of the patient records and decided to pull out Toby's records again. But this time, she couldn't seem to find them. She searched around in different places to see if maybe the records had been misplaced, but to her surprise, the records were nowhere to be found. It was as if Toby had never been to Shadyside Hospital. The next day at lunch, Lori told Skye that she hadn't seen Nurse Wilton all day, but Skye said that didn't mean that someone had killed her. It was the same thing she had heard when she asked about Nurse Wilton at the nurse's station that morning, that maybe she had the day off, maybe she had called out for the day. After work, Lori headed home to change clothes before going back out. She needed a dark outfit to sneak around at night. Then she left and headed toward the Dean house. She parked her car on the curb just before pulling onto Fear Street and left the car unlocked in case she had to make a hasty retreat. Lori made her way to the Dean house. When she arrived outside, she crept up to the house and peered in through the kitchen window. She saw Toby sitting at a table with a strange woman sitting next to him. Lori couldn't hear what was being said, but she could see that Toby kept shaking his head, and the woman beside him looked frustrated. Lori also noticed Miss Dean standing in the kitchen with a strange man. Eventually, Miss Dean grabbed Toby by the arm and walked him to the back door as he began crying. Then she picked up a suitcase and led Toby out the door with the strange man. Lori watched as the man and woman got into a car and drove off with Toby inside. Just as Lori was about to leave, she heard the unmistakable wail of a child crying inside the Dean house. Lori then decided that she needed to talk to Dr. Price and tell him what's been going on at the hospital. Maybe there was some kind of connection to everything that had been going on. As she started heading back to her car, she noticed that she was being followed by a beat-up blue Honda. She hid behind a tree and watched as the car passed by. When the car passed, she hurried into her car and fumbled for the keys. Then she saw the Honda turn around and come back. As it pulled back up, a man got out of the car. It was Rick. Lori started up her car and took off, almost hitting Rick, and as she passed by, he tried to grab the door handle of her car. Lori got away and started heading back home. She kept checking in her rearview mirror to make sure Rick wasn't following her. When she got home, she ran to her room and decided to call Andy and ask if she could speak to his dad. She lied to him and told him she wanted to do an interview with him for extra credit. He told her that he wasn't home at the moment, but he told her she could come over tomorrow morning and talk with him before he left for the hospital. After she got off the phone, she still felt a little shaken up from her encounter on Fear Street, and her Aunt Hillary still wasn't home yet. Lori decided to call Sky and ask her if she could come over and stay the night with her. Sky agreed and told her to come over, but just as Lori was about to get off the phone, she heard the sound of the back door coming open. She told Sky not to worry about it, that her aunt was finally home. Lori hung up the phone and called out to Hillary, but there was no reply. She stepped to the doorway of her room and listened. She called out again, but still no reply. Then she realized that someone, not Hillary, was coming up the back stairs. Chapter 17. Lori clapped an icy hand over her mouth as she listened in terror at the bedroom door. Creak. A footstep. Silence. She held her breath and backed away from the door. Creak. Another footstep. Silence. She ran to the window and peered out. All she could see was the empty driveway below. No sign of Aunt Hillary's car, or anyone else's car. If she climbed out the window, the drop to the driveway was far enough to break her bones. She was alone in the house, trapped in her room, with an unknown terror creeping up the stairs toward her. Desperate, she dove for the phone at her bedside, but she was in such a panic that she knocked over the night table, sending the phone and everything else tumbling to the floor with a loud crash. Silence, for a long time. Then, creak, another footstep on the back stairs, much closer now. Lori fell to her knees and grabbed for the phone, which had rolled under her bed. Creak. Light flashed through the window and flooded her bedroom just then. A car had turned into the driveway, its tires crunching the gravel. Lori heard the car door slam. Then footsteps were outside, and a key was turning in the front door. Lori? Aunt Hillary was home. Whoever had entered the house scrambled down the stairs and fled out the back door before Lori could even call out to her aunt. "What a day," Hillary Benedict said, dropping her briefcase and bag on the front hall table. Tired or not, she still looked cool and sleek and attractive. She turned as Lori came flying down the staircase. The calm on her face immediately gave way to an expression of alarm when she saw Lori. "What's the matter? What is it? You look as if you've just seen a ghost," she said. Lori found herself speechless for a moment. "What happened?" Hillary insisted. "Wasn't that Andy Price's car I saw at the curb just now? Why was he in such a rush to leave? Lori, honey, are you okay?" "I am now," Lori gasped. "Now that you're home." She hugged her aunt, unable to say anything else. "Tell me about it," Hillary said gently, putting her arm around Lori and leading her into the kitchen. "Come on, I'm going to give you some orange juice and honey, to get some color back into your face. Then you can tell me what happened. Also, why are you dressed that way, in your gardening clothes? Did you just have a fight with Andy? Is that it?" No, it wasn't Andy. And that couldn't have been his car you saw. I was just talking to him on the phone." Lori collapsed at the table in the large, cozy breakfast nook, weak with relief as Hillary poured her a glass of juice. A sudden new thought startled her, and she sat up, tense again. Had that been Rick in her house? Had he followed her home from Fear Street? "Was it a blue car you saw? A banged-up blue Honda?" she asked Hillary. "No, it was a Volvo, like Andy's. At least that's what I thought," Hillary said, setting the glass in front of Lori and sitting opposite her. "What's going on?" She tucked her honey blonde hair that was so much like Lori's behind her ears and leaned forward, waiting. She didn't believe in pushing her niece, but sometimes worry made it difficult to be patient. Lori finished the juice and sighed. The sugar gave her a fast zap of energy, and she was ready to tell Hillary what had happened, everything that had happened. "Someone was in the house just now," she began, shivering at the memory. "Coming up the back stairs. You scared him away." "A burglar?" Hillary jumped up from the table. "Why didn't you say so right away? I'm calling the police." She headed for the kitchen phone. "No, wait, let me explain. Whoever it was is gone. I heard him run out the back door when you were coming in the front. Don't call the police, please." "Him? You saw who it was?" "No, I was just guessing. It could have been a her," Lori admitted. "Stay right there." Hillary ran to the back door. Lori heard it slam. Then her aunt returned. "Did you come in the back way?" Lori nodded. "The door was open. Do you remember closing it? Locking it?" "I don't remember. I was very upset. Listen, you can't call the police about this. I'm in enough trouble already." Lori took a deep breath. "I found a dead body at the hospital yesterday, in the new Franklin Fear Wing. One of the nurses. She was murdered. Stabbed. But when the security guards came, the body was gone. Just vanished. Now they think I made it all up, that I was kidding, or I'm crazy, or something. Nobody believes me. So you can't tell the police about the burglar tonight, because they'll think I'm doing it again, making up stories. They must have heard about the body that wasn't there. But I know what I saw." The words tumbled out in an excited rush, leaving Lori breathless. Hillary sat down again, her mouth open in shock. A frown creased her forehead as she tried to understand. "A body? Disappeared?" "And that's not all," Lori said. She told her aunt about Toby Dean, and the other child she had heard crying in the Dean house, and about Toby's mother, who she was afraid was mistreating him. "It's all connected. I know it. The nurse and little Toby. Everything. Something terrible is going on at Shadyside Hospital, and I got caught in the middle of it. Oh, Hillary, I'm so scared." "I don't blame you," Hillary said, her blue eyes reflecting the fear in Lori's. She reached across the kitchen table and took Lori's cold hand. "We'll have to do something about it. But you know, maybe it's all too much for you. Working at the hospital, being around sick people all day. Maybe the best thing would be for you to leave. You could spend the rest of the summer with your grandparents in California. I know they'd love to have you, and—" "You don't believe me." Lori snatched her hand away and glared at her aunt. "You think I'm imagining things." "No, honey, of course not. I've always believed you. You know that. I'm just worried and trying to think of what's best for you." "I'll bet you think I made it all up, don't you?" Lori exploded. "Just like everyone else. You think that was Andy sneaking out of the house just now, right? Well, it wasn't. And everything else I told you is true, whether you believe me or not." "I do believe you. I simply don't want you in any danger. You said yourself that you're scared. If you're in a bad situation that you can't fix, the only thing to do is to get away from it. Leave it alone." Lori shook her head vehemently. "But I can fix it. I'm going to see Dr. Price tomorrow, Andy's stepfather. He won't think I'm lying. It's his hospital, and he'll care about what's been going on. He'll help. I know it. I'm not quitting." Okay, slow down." Hillary stopped the rush of angry words. "I've got a better idea. How about if I see Dr. Price and explain what's been going on? I've been doing a job for the Board of Trustees at Shadyside Hospital for the past few days, and I'm there every day." "You are?" Lori said, surprised. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to crowd you. Don't make a big deal of it. It's nothing mysterious, just a routine audit, and I can see Ray Price any time I want." "Let me talk to him for you," Hillary pleaded. Lori jumped up furious. "Oh, great. Now you're going to treat me like an idiot child. No way. I'm perfectly capable of talking to Dr. Price myself, so stay out of it. I'm sorry I told you anything." She stormed out of the kitchen, angry and sick about everything. On the way up the stairs, she realized that what she was most sick about was having had a fight with her aunt. Showering the day's grime away made Lori feel a little better. She began to plan what she'd say to Dr. Price in the morning. She'd have to tell him everything, and warn him about Rick Spencer, too. But would he believe her? If Skye and Aunt Hillary didn't, would anyone? She slipped into fresh pajamas and made sure that her night table was steady again and that her phone and lamp were working. She was glad that the only damage she had done when she toppled the table was a small nick in the frame of the old photograph of her parents that she kept at her bedside. She had been planning to get a new frame for it anyhow. Drowsily, she lay down in bed and picked up the photo of her parents. She studied their faces intently, as she had done so often when she was a child, wondering, imagining, what it would have been like if... Exhaustion finally caught up with her. She replaced the photo and turned out the light. Soon she was breathing evenly and sound asleep. The sudden jangling of the phone brought her completely awake again. Who in the world would be calling at that hour? She grabbed the receiver and said a sleepy, "Hello? Lori, it's Rick Spencer. Sorry I'm calling so late. I had to talk to you. I want to know why you ran away from me on Fear Street. What did I do?" "Are you kidding? What did you do?" Lori sputtered. Amazed at his nerve, she sat up in bed and turned on the light. For a moment, she didn't know where to begin. Then she plunged ahead. How about, for starters, stealing hospital property? I saw you the other day. I saw you steal those surgical knives from the ninth floor nurses' station. You sneaked them into your pocket when you thought no one was looking. Don't tell me you didn't. Of course I took them, but I didn't sneak them, Rick protested. You admit it. I don't know what you're so excited about. I told you I was sent to the ninth floor on an errand. That was the errand. If you want his name, Dr. Cortese was the surgeon who sent me to pick up those knives for him. Remember, I am working on the surgical floor. Lori was momentarily surprised. Okay, what did you do with them? I gave them to Dr. Cortese, of course. He sounded exasperated. What do you think I did with them? Operated on someone? Stabbed someone? Lori gulped. How could Rick joke about stabbing someone? Either he was very clever, or else Lori was very mistaken. But she wasn't mistaken. She was sure of it. There was something wrong, something terribly phony about Rick. She charged ahead, challenging him to trip himself up. Well then, tell me why you followed that nurse into the Franklin Fear Wing off the ninth floor yesterday. Nurse Wilton. I saw you duck inside after her. You were following her, weren't you? And you... She bit off the next words. She couldn't bring herself to accuse him of the grisly murder, or to admit that the body had disappeared. Ducking the thought, she rushed on. And you were following me tonight, on Fear Street. Why? What are you up to? What were you doing on Fear Street anyhow? There was a long pause. Then, in a grim voice, Rick said, Lori, I'm warning you. Stay away from Fear Street. You're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble. Chapter 18. Saturday morning dawned gray and chilly. Lori opened her eyes, one at a time, and groaned. She'd had a restless night of bad dreams and would have loved to burrow under the covers and stay there. But she knew that her meeting with Dr. Price was more important than anything else. After dragging herself out of bed, she showered, dressed in her most attractive burgundy pants and a pink blouse, and went downstairs to polish off a plate of microwave pancakes for breakfast. Aunt Hillary had left already, and there was no note from her. Lori was sorry about that, but glad not to have to continue an unpleasant argument. She could solve her own problems, and that's just what she intended to do. Her head had cleared by the time she parked her BMW next to Andy's Volvo in the Price driveway. Dr. Price himself opened the door when she rang the bell. Lori, dear, don't you look lovely? Come in, come in. As always, he looked so big and important, even when he was being friendly and super charming, that Lori felt a little overwhelmed. He steered her across the front hall and into his library. Andy's still sleeping, I think, but I got the note he left me last night. Glad to do an interview for such an important member of my staff. Oh, don't laugh, he said as he sat her down across the desk from him. You'd be surprised how vital you student volunteers are at the hospital. You're a great help to the medical team, and you certainly make the patients feel better. I only wish we could pay you, but... He waved his hand in a gesture of regret. Ah, well, you're not interested in our budget problems. Now what's this project you wanted to interview me about? He leaned forward, smiling as he fixed Lori with his dark, almost black eyes. Lori choked on a momentary spasm of guilt for being there under false pretenses, but she recovered at the thought of what was at stake. She took a deep breath and began. It's not a project, it's a problem, a bad one, and you're the only person I can come to. It's about the hospital. I mean, what's going on there? It's terrible. She got it out quickly. Nurse Wilton was murdered in the Fear Wing. I saw her, but somebody moved her body, and when the guards came, they didn't believe me. What? Dr. Price sat up in his chair, shock and horror on his face. You saw someone kill a nurse? No, I didn't see anyone kill her. I saw the body. Afterward, she was lying on the floor with a knife in her throat, a surgical knife. She was dead, so I ran to get help. Why wasn't I told? Dr. Price said, outraged. Because she wasn't there anymore. The body was gone, and they all thought I was joking. But I promise you, I'm telling the absolute truth. I should have been informed in any case, even if I didn't believe you. An incident like this. What did you say the nurse's name was? Edith Wilton, Lori answered, feeling a little uncomfortable using Nurse Wilton's first name. You know her. I think I saw you talking to her at the elevator on the medical school floor. She works on the children's floor. That name isn't familiar, but that doesn't mean anything. I make it a point to talk to all the staff whenever I see them. What I'm trying to tell you is that I know she's dead. She wasn't at the hospital yesterday after I found her body. But everybody thinks I'm lying. Lori's frustration was building again. Did he think she was lying too? Dr. Price reached for his phone. "We'll get to the bottom of this," he said firmly as he punched out a number. "I'm calling my supervisor of nurses direct. She'll know what's going on better than anyone." "Oh, hello, Doris. It's Ray." "Just fine, thanks, and I'll be seeing you later this morning. There are some reports I want to ask you about, but I'm calling now about one of your nurses, Edith Wilton." He raised his eyebrows at Lori as if to confirm the name with her. "Yes, that's right, Wilton. Is she on duty this weekend?" "No, no particular reason. I just wanted to know, if you don't mind looking her up." He leaned back in his chair, covered the receiver, and said to Lori, "She's checking, so you can just relax for a minute and let me—" "Yes, Doris?" "Oh, are you sure?" Yes, I do remember." He was peering suspiciously at Lori as he spoke. "Right, no problem. Well, thanks for telling me. I'll see you later." "She's not there, is she?" Lori asked after Dr. Price had hung up. He sighed. "Lori, dear, this nurse that you say you saw dead, she went on vacation last week, starting Thursday evening. She'll be off for 3 weeks, and the nurse supervisor reminded me that this vacation was scheduled more than 2 months ago. I remember we had to arrange for some additional people to cover the shifts because so many of the nurses were going to take vacations around now, and that includes your nurse Wilton." Lori's heart sank. He didn't believe her. No one did. She scrunched lower in her chair, utterly miserable. She didn't know what to say to Dr. Price, who obviously thought she was crazy. "What's bothering you, Lori? Is there something I can help you with? You can tell me." He was studying her with concern on his face. Well, it's not just Nurse Wilton." She was upset and embarrassed, but she had to tell him the rest. She had nothing to lose, she decided. "There was a little boy in the hospital. I saw him on the children's floor before he was discharged. I think he's being mistreated at home by his mother, only he's not there anymore. I went to his house and saw him being driven away by a man and a woman, and he looked very upset and, like, he didn't want to go." Dr. Price's eyes narrowed. Lori could tell that he was disturbed, and probably as confused as she was. "Let me see if I understand," he said. "You're telling me that a child has disappeared too?" "No, not too. He didn't vanish like the body. I just don't know how to explain it. You see, the nurse disappeared, but the little boy was sent away. It sounds crazy, I know, but I can't stop worrying about—" "Worrying," Dr. Price said, nodding. "That's what you're doing too much of, I'm afraid. Maybe I can set your mind at ease about some of this. Now, what's the name of this child, and why was he in the hospital?" "His name's Toby Dean. He had pneumonia. He lives on Fear Street. He's only 3, and he was crying the whole time he was in the hospital. I just know he's in trouble." "Oh, Lori, most children cry when they're sick and away from home, and frightened. But this may make you feel better. All children who live in Shadyside are automatically scheduled for a follow-up visit by the doctors who treat them. They would have arranged for him to come in for a checkup fairly soon after he was discharged." He shifted in his seat, then raised his eyes, studying her. "Toby Dean, you say? Was that his name? When I go to my office, I'll make sure that the chief pediatrician has a note in the child's records for a follow-up visit, and—" "His records are gone," Lori said sheepishly. "I was looking for them, but they were missing." "People and records? Everything seems to be disappearing." A faint smile crept around the doctor's mouth as he looked at Lori with sympathy. "I think you're the one who needs a vacation the most. What do you say?" "You're not telling me to quit, are you?" Lori cried. "I mean, you're not going to ask me to leave the hospital?" "Not if you don't want to go. Of course not. It's up to you. If you think that it's not too much pressure on you, I certainly want you to stay and continue helping us. You tell me how you feel." "I love it there, and I don't need a vacation. Please, let me stay. Only—" She broke off, wondering if this was the best time to ask for a favor. Well, why not? He was the only person who could help her. "Only, they've got me stuck in the X-ray department. Could you get me transferred back to the children's floor? They need me more than X-ray does, and I know I could do a good job there. Would you fix it with the nurse supervisor?" Dr. Price pursed his lips. He leaned on his desk and slowly pushed himself to his feet. "Well now, we'll see. I'll talk to Nurse Schneider when I meet up with her this morning. You're not due back until Monday, is that right? Maybe I can arrange it for some time next week. Meanwhile, You stop worrying about everything. He came around the desk to where Lori was sitting and put a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him with hope. And Lori, my dear, he continued, I know there's an explanation for everything, and I'm going to find out what's been going on that's upset you so. His kindly smile warmed her, and she breathed easier. I'll certainly have someone check on that little boy right away, and then I'll see what I can do about transferring you. Does that make you feel better? Much better. Lori jumped to her feet. At least, Dr. Price was going to do something. She was glad she had gone to see him. He circled her chair and smiled at her once more. I must rush off now, but I'm delighted we had this talk, even if it was confusing. We'll talk again, I promise. And don't hesitate to come see me any time you've got a problem. You know you've always got a special welcome in this house. There was a knock on the library door. I think Andy's up now. I hope I'll see you again, dear. Soon. Remember, no more worrying. He strode to the door and opened it. We're just finishing our interview, he said to Andy as they passed each other in the doorway. Goodbye, you two. Have a good time today. Then he was gone, and Lori sighed. It was a mission only half accomplished, but it was better than nothing. What were you two talking about? Andy asked, crossing the library to Lori. Some interviews I'm doing for extra credit next term. Lori felt a small prickling at the back of her neck. Had Andy been eavesdropping on their conversation? Had he heard everything she'd said? Andy boogied a few steps in front of her and held out his arms. How about some extra credit with me? He slid an arm around her waist and bent to kiss her. Not now, Andy. She turned her face from his and slid out of his grasp. I'm not in the mood, really. Why not? Andy demanded. Why are you always pushing me away lately? He smiled his attractive, crooked smile that Lori usually found so appealing. His charm was definitely wearing thin, Lori thought. I've got to be going, she said. I'm meeting Skye at the mall. I'll see you tonight, okay? He jammed his hands into the pockets of his cutoffs and became sullen. Look, if you're meeting someone, why didn't you just say so? I'm entitled to the truth, Lori. If there is some other guy, I'd like to know. Is it someone from school? I told you, I'm meeting Skye. Lori sighed, weary of his jealousy. Or maybe someone you met at the hospital, Andy continued. A med student? Or one of those sexy volunteers you told me about? That did it. Lori thought she'd explode with anger. When did I ever say there were... Oh, never mind. I'm pretty sick of your suspicions, you know. And I'm fed up with your getting jealous and mad whenever I want to do something without you. Like, I've got a whole life, and I'm not planning to live it in one place. Not yet, anyhow. Good for you, Andy shot back. I suppose you'd rather do anything else than go out with me tonight. Is that it? Right now, that's exactly how I feel, Lori replied through clenched teeth. So you've got another date for tonight. Is that why you'd pick a fight with me? To get out of our date? I picked a fight. Andy, at this moment, all I can think of is spending some time home alone, in peace and quiet, without you bugging me. You really don't know when to give it a rest. She stormed out of the library, her face burning. Lori! Andy called, running after her. No, just leave me alone. Permanently. She flew down the front steps, jumped into her car, and roared off, leaving Andy standing in the doorway. It wasn't the way she would have planned to end it, but he had pushed her too far, too often. Driving to the mall to meet Skye, she began to calm down. She was sure that Andy would be calling to apologize before long, and she wanted to think of the best way to handle it. She and Andy were wrong for each other, and he ought to be able to see it. Why couldn't people simply agree to break up without anyone getting hurt? There ought to be an easy way. Oh well, she'd cope with it later. She'd have a long, dateless Saturday night to figure it out. She pulled into the parking lot at the mall and stopped in front of the bookstore. Skye was just inside the door, checking out the magazines. They waved to each other before Lori locked her car door. She straightened up and squinted at the gray and cloudy day. Perfect. It was as gloomy as she felt. Suddenly, she saw a sight that made her heart leap. Halfway across the parking lot, Miss Stine was unlocking her car door. At her side, clutching the teddy bear Lori had given him, was Toby. He was back, and he looked much better than when she had seen him with the strange couple at his house. Lori was amazed and thrilled. Toby, she called to him. She waved her arm in a big circle so that he could see her. Lori, he called back excitedly. She started toward him. He took a small step in her direction, but Miss Stine grabbed his arm and jerked him back. Flinging open the car door, she practically threw him inside. then jumped in after him. As the car sped quickly out of the parking lot, Lori could see Toby twisting around desperately in his seat to look at her through the rear window. Chapter 19. Shopping is no fun, Lori decided, unless you're in a really good mood. She dragged herself through the rest of the day at the mall, barely listening to Sky's chatter. All she could hear was Toby's happy cry when he saw her in the parking lot. All she could think of was his unhappy little face through the car window as he was driven away. She trailed Sky through what seemed like every store in the mall. Even though there were things she needed, her heart wasn't in shopping, and nothing appealed to her. Finally, she just gave up and kept Sky company. When they stopped for lunch, she told Sky that she had just had a fight with Andy. She said it casually, without going into any details. "Gee, that's too bad. Is it serious?" Sky asked, wanting to know more. Lori heard just the tiniest edge of hope creep into her friend's voice. After all, if Andy were free... Lori shrugged. "I don't know. Yes, I think so. We'll see. Anyway, we broke our date for tonight. That is, I did. I'm actually looking forward to a peaceful evening home alone." "Sure you are," Sky said, unconvinced. "Wait till tomorrow." Then she was off and running about her date with Jim Farrow that night, and what she absolutely had to find to wear before she could even consider leaving her house. By the end of the afternoon, Sky's arms were loaded with packages, half of which would be returned the next week. The only thing Lori had bought was a lipstick, just to stop Sky from complaining that she was a drag. When they got out into the parking lot, the sky was dark, and the wind had blown menacing black clouds overhead. A faraway grumble of thunder filled the air. A storm was coming. It would be a good night to be cozy at home, Lori thought as she and Sky parted. Hillary's car wasn't in the driveway when Lori drove in. No lights were shining through the windows of the big house either. As Lori locked the door of the BMW, an angry flash of electric blue lightning cracked the distant sky. She shuddered and hurried inside. The first thing she did was to circle the downstairs, turning on lights, one after the other, till the whole floor was ablaze. As she went, she checked all the outside doors and windows, making sure they were all securely locked. She tested the lock on the basement door and was satisfied. Then she started upstairs. Halfway up the curving steps, she stopped and listened. Was that a sound inside the house, coming from the second floor? Fear rooted her to the stairs. Then she saw the blue light that flashed through an upstairs window and heard the sizzle of lightning outside. No one was in the house. She was just hearing the noise of the storm. She hurried upstairs before she lost her nerve. She felt better as soon as she got all the second floor lights turned on and the windows checked. She changed into jeans, sneakers, and her big white Irish knit sweater and went downstairs to the kitchen. She wasn't going to wait for her aunt for dinner. She might have decided to work around the clock on the hospital audit. After a bowl of hot tomato soup and a green salad, neither of which Lori really tasted, she settled in the library to watch television. The minutes crept by with painful slowness. She kept checking her watch, wondering how long it would be before Hillary came home. She began to feel unbearably vulnerable. She turned the volume on the TV set low and tried to listen for sounds, friendly or threatening. Before long, her thoughts started drifting to Toby. Why was he back with Miss Dean so soon? The suitcase he drove off with seemed to suggest that he would be gone for quite a long time. Who was the child crying in the Dean house after Toby left? What was the connection between Toby and Nurse Wilton? And why was Miss Dean always so rough with him? He was such a sweet, lovable child. What can I do? Lori thought. He's in danger. I'm sure of it. But I don't know how to help him. Finally, she couldn't stand it any longer. She had to know if he was all right. She jumped up and turned off the television set. Picking up the phone, she punched in the number of the Dean house, which she remembered from the chart. She hadn't even thought up a good excuse for calling when she heard the phone ringing and realized she'd better come up with something fast. The phone rang for a long time. Lori waited nervously. Finally, a grouchy voice answered. "Yes?" It was Miss Dean. This is, Lori Masters. I sold you a raffle ticket the other day, but I don't remember if I gave it to you. I have an extra ticket in my booklet, and I wondered if it's yours." "Oh, for heaven's sake," Miss Dean snapped with annoyance. "You're a real nuisance, aren't you? I don't care whether I got my ticket or not here, and I'm very busy right now. Goodbye." "Wait," Lori pleaded. "Could I just say hello to Toby? I'm sure he'd like—" "No, you can't," Miss Dean shouted. "And I don't want you snooping around us anymore. Do you understand? Just butt out. I mean that, Lori. Stay away from us." Before the angry woman could hang up, Lori heard a shrill cry in the background. A child's cry. "Lori! Lori!" Then came the sound of a slap, a howl of pain, and the receiver came crashing down in her ear. Toby! She hit him! Lori grabbed her car keys and flew out of the house. Chapter 20. On the way to Fear Street, Lori thought frantically about what she'd do. She had to get into the Dean house and find Toby. Was he badly hurt? Did he need a doctor? She was shaking with rage and worry as she drove. How could that woman be so cruel to a child? To her own son? It was sick. Lori slowed the car when she reached the curve of Fear Street near Toby's house. She peered through the windshield at the dark houses rolling by. A jagged bolt of lightning lit up the sky and turned her hands and arms pale blue. She recoiled as the thunder boomed in her ears, loud and close. The storm would break any minute. Leaving the BMW unlocked at the foot of the Dean's driveway, she scuttled across the big lawn to the house. Another burst of lightning, and Lori thought she saw a face in the upstairs window, but she wasn't sure. She circled the outside of the house, looking for a way to slip inside. Maybe one of the downstairs windows was open. She tried them, one after another, without luck. Then she reached the kitchen window at the back of the house. A crack showed at its base. She slid the window up noiselessly and boosted herself in through the opening. The rain was coming down as she slithered inside and dropped to the kitchen floor. Her sneakers muffled the sound of her landing, but as she backed away from the window in the dark, she didn't see the kitchen table, loaded with its jumble of dirty dishes. Her hip struck the table's edge, and a bowl jumped off and crashed to the floor. She froze and held her breath. For a moment, there wasn't another sound, except that of the storm outside. Hoping that she hadn't been heard, Lori went back to pick up the broken pieces. Lightning flashed again, but this time it was inside her head, and it was accompanied by a violent pain at the back of her neck. She had been struck, hard. As she crumpled to the floor, she sensed, rather than saw, a dark figure looming over her. Someone had been in the kitchen all the time, waiting for her, waiting to strike. Lori groaned and tried to get up. She pushed herself weakly to her knees and bent over, gasping for breath. Sparks of light still flashed in front of her eyes. She felt someone seize her roughly under the arms and haul her to her feet. She staggered as strong hands dragged her across the kitchen to a door. Then she was propelled down a flight of bare steps to a dark cellar. She felt her captor shove her into a chair. Then everything became gray and misty. When Lori's head finally cleared, she realized that she must have blacked out for a few minutes. She tried to move, but couldn't. Something was cutting into her arms and legs. She was tied tightly to the chair, thick rope binding her arms and ankles to the chair's legs. Then she realized that someone was leaning over her. Lori looked up into the angry face of Miss Stine. "Scream all you want," Miss Stine snarled at her. "No one will hear you. I warned you, but you wouldn't listen." She gave the ropes a final tug and turned toward the cellar steps. "You meddling fool," she said over her shoulder as she climbed the steps and slammed the cellar door above. Lori strained at the ropes, but there wasn't an inch to give. She grunted and pulled again. Then she heard Miss Stine's voice float down to the cellar from the kitchen phone upstairs. Lori stopped struggling and listened. "It's that girl again, Lori Masters," Miss Stine said. "She showed up here, snooping around. She broke into the house, but I've got her." "No, she can't get away. She's tied up in the cellar, good and tight. But you'll have to deal with her yourself. This is more than I signed on for." "Okay, take care of her aunt first, then come finish off the girl. And hurry." Miss Dean slammed the phone down with a bang. Aunt Hillary in danger too? Lori's eyes widened in horror. What did Hillary have to do with any of this? She wasn't involved. But they were going to kill her, and Lori too. She had to warn her aunt. She had to get free if she was going to save them both. She struggled frantically against the ropes, but they were so tight that each tug brought sharp pain to her wrists. She tried again and cried out as the rope sliced into her skin. Helplessly, she hung her head and let the tears fall from her eyes. She heard thunder crash outside, and raindrops slapped the high window of the cellar. A fresh burst of lightning and another roll of thunder penetrated the gloom of the dark room. Lori scanned the cellar during the flash. She saw something glinting on a long table across the cellar. Scissors, on the work table. If she could reach them, she could cut herself free. She started scooting her chair toward the table. The sound of legs scraping on the cement floor echoed through the damp cellar. She realized that any further noise would bring Miss Dean down to investigate. She'd have to wait until she was sure that Miss Dean had left the kitchen. Straining to listen, Lori tried to gather her strength. In her head, she counted the minutes ticking by. The waiting became intolerable. Every second brought her aunt and herself closer to death. At last, she thought it was safe. There had been no sound from upstairs for a while. In the quiet, she began edging her chair toward the work table. Slowly, painfully, trying not to make too much noise, she worked her way across the cellar floor. The lightning flashes guided her. The thunder helped drown out the thumping and scraping of her chair, as well as the beating of her heart, which boomed in her ears. Bit by bit, inch by inch, bouncing the chair, sliding it, stopping to listen for danger. It took forever, but at last, Lori was able to maneuver the chair over to the work table and turn it around so that she could reach for the scissors. Her hand crawled up to the tabletop, stretching, straining. She could feel the tips of the scissors with her fingers. A sound from upstairs. Lori gasped and held her breath. From her position beside the work table, she could see up the dark stairs to the cellar door above. The next flash of lightning revealed a sight that chilled her. The doorknob was turning. The door was opening. As the dark closed in again at the top of the stairs, she heard a creak on the steps. They were coming to get her now.